Welcome to I Can Become. My name is Bohan, and I am 10 years old. I live in Portland, and I like playing chess, cubing, and jet design. When I grow up, I want to be an aerospace engineer. I really want to know more about becoming an engineer, so my friends at ICAN Radio have arranged for me to talk to Zac Pebley, a professional aerospace engineer. I want to ask him about becoming an aerospace engineer and what he wanted to be when he grew up. So let's take flight.
Flight 229, you're clear for takeoff.
Hi, Zac. Welcome to I Can Become. Can you tell us a little about yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Zac Pebley. I'm an advanced lead engineer at GE Aerospace. I work specifically in aeromechanics, and I work on making sure jet engines are safe and can get you from point A to point B very well and efficiently.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
That's an interesting question. One of the first things I probably remember wanting to be was when I was like 5, I was a paleontologist. So I always was kind of drawn to the idea of science and stuff. And then as I got older, I started really getting an interest in flight and aircraft and just different things along that lines. And that took me into space. And I started just studying whatever I could in the sky. And so for a while there, I wanted to become a theoretical astrophysicist, but eventually realized that I didn't want to study science. I wanted to do something with the science. And that led me to aerospace engineering, which is where I am now.
What is it like being an aerospace engineer?
Being an aerospace engineer is both awesome and carries with it a lot of responsibility. And the reason why I say that is it's awesome. It's something that people have wanted to do for ages. If you look back through history, peoples of everywhere, like there are Chinese texts on this of people wanting to fly. And you get through, and like the classic example is Leonardo da Vinci had notebooks where he tried to invent wings. And there's the stories of Icarus. It's something that humanity has looked for a long time. So there's that kind of responsibility of now we're there. Now we are flying. And we have these machines that we make that take us into the air, that take us into space. And it's kind of just that building upon of the past that is really cool. But there's also the responsibility that comes on top of it, because now we also need to make sure that's safe. We need to make sure that it's efficient. We don't want to have something that is going to cause a lot of problems. So just kind of in general, it's awesome to do aerospace engineering. It's awesome to be that person who gets to do flight. But there's also just that, again, there's that sense of responsibility on top of that, of making sure it's done well and done safely.
Do you make engines for space, or do you make them for planes that fly over here?
I work on plane engines, really. Specifically, I work on turboprops, so the big ones you'd see on commercial airliners.
Why did you choose jet engines over space engines?
That is a really good question. When I went to college, I intended to do space engines. I intended to do rockets, not jets. And honestly, I think the big difference was when I started taking classes, because a lot of the classes early on in your college education for the two are similar, because at the base they're very similar devices. And I just fell more in love with jets than I did with rockets. I had a lot of friends that went the other way. They took those base classes and went, nope, I want to go the rocket route. And it's kind of just what appeals to you at that point. I don't really know if I have a good explanation for why I picked it other than it's the one that felt right.
What are some skills you need to become an engineer?
Well, it's engineering. You got to be good at math. You got to be good at science. But I would make the argument that one people don't think about is you also need to understand art a little bit. And I don't mean that from you don't necessarily have to be good at doing it. You don't have to be able to go to a museum and say, oh, this is this artist and stuff like that. What you have to learn to appreciate it. Engineering, you'll hear a lot of people talk about stuff like, oh, this equation is beautiful, or, oh, look at this design, it's elegant. And a lot of that comes down to humans are drawn to a certain beauty that just seems to work. The math still has to work. You still have to know how to do the math. You still have to prove that it works. But as you kind of build up your math skills and your instincts over the years, you're going to be able to look at stuff and just see how the stresses and forces travel through objects. And there's a certain beauty to that. And I found that being able to sit back and appreciate art of different kinds really helps with that, especially with sculpture, a lot of artists try to push what they can do. I don't look at a sculpture now and go, oh, wow, that's pretty. I look at a sculpture and I go, oh, I see how they're holding that up there, how that structure is hanging off the side. And it's it's an engineer's eye for art, but I think the reverse is also true. It's important to have an artist's eye for engineering.
What has been your favorite moment as a space engineer?
I think my favorite moment was one time I was getting on an airplane, and there was a young kid beside me, probably 5, 6. It was his first flight ever. And then his mother sits beside him, and I see her sit down, and she kind of closes her eyes, and her hands get a little like white knuckled as we start to take off, and I notice she's terrified of flying. I don't know why, but she is. And this is her son's first flight. And you can tell she is trying to not give him a bad experience. And he starts looking out the window, and I don't know how often you've sat near the wing, but you see the wing kind of flexing up and down as you fly. And that's important. That's actually very important for the plane to stay where it's supposed to be. It's distributing stresses. But he sees that and he starts going, oh, why is the wing doing that? Like, what's wrong? And I sit there and I look out and I go, oh, well, it's doing this. And I'm able to explain to him that it's just the wing doing what it's supposed to do and we're fine. And that kind of leads to me talking to him throughout most of the flight. And he has an awesome flight. We land, he turns to his mom and goes, Mom, I want to fly all the time. And she kind of looks at me and she puts a smile and she goes, you helped me too, thanks. And it was just that experience of knowing how the thing works and being able to explain it to somebody else. I think that was probably my favorite moment as an aerospace engineer.
What is the hardest part about being an aerospace engineer, do you think?
The fear of getting it wrong.
Fear of getting it wrong?
Yeah, so aerospace engineering, you're putting stuff in the sky, and gravity always wins. The whole job is fighting gravity, so there's no room for error. If something goes wrong, they talk about it on the news. Fortunately, flying is the safest way to travel, statistically. And part of that is because all of us designing these, the people who design the aircraft, the people who design the engines, we are all very well aware that we have to get it right. We are aware of that. The companies have so many systems in place. The government regulates it. Every government regulates it. That's all a good thing because it keeps us safe. It keeps flying the safest way to travel. But I think as an engineer, that's the thing that is the hardest, is the fear that you did miss something.
What do you do when you face a roadblock?
Facing roadblocks is something you have to do every day. And to a certain extent, it is hard because you're sitting there, you're working, you're making a good design, and then you hit this roadblock. And I have found that the best thing to do is to go to more senior engineers. It's to go to mentors. I mentioned earlier on that a lot of engineering is based on what has come before. And it is that legacy of previous engineers that we still go back to. If I have a roadblock, even my experts in the field may not have an answer, but it's going to them and talking to them, and then you bounce ideas off each other. You brainstorm it. You think about things that have happened in the past. A lot of times there's a similar answer that is on a completely different discipline than what you're used to. If you're having a problem in one area, they might have solved a similar problem somewhere else, and the two groups just aren't talking, but somebody might have heard them talking about it in a different meeting. Now, there are novel problems that nobody has the answer to, and those roadblocks are even harder, but in that case, it's even more important to talk with people both with more experience and, to be honest with you, with people with less experience too. Because once you get too much experience, you start thinking along certain lines, which is good, but it's sometimes good to have somebody come in with fresh eyes and just look at it and go, well, why don't we do this? Again, it all comes down to that teamwork. It's probably the most challenging aspect of it, but it's also the only way you can move forward and really solve problems.
What do you think of like Elon Musk's SpaceX and his Mars mission?
I think that expansion is in humanity's blood. I think it is the most human thing in the world to explore and to want to know what's beyond that next hill, to want to know what's on Mars. And I think that whether it's Elon Musk's or anybody else's Mars mission, I think that's the core of it. And I think that's awesome and amazing. And from a little more pragmatic standpoint, something like that just pushes humanity to greater things. If you think back to the Apollo programs where we went to the moon, that led computers forward exponentially. That led to developments of things like Velcro. I think any mission to Mars is going to be good for humanity. I think it's going to push us to do things. I think it's going to push us to invent things. And I think it answers that itch that we all have to know what's coming next, to know what's over the horizon.
What is something I should focus on like at school to become a good aerospace engineer?
Math, science, maybe a little more math and art. I kind of joke about that, but realistically, though, you need to understand math to do engineering. You need to understand the physics to do the engineering. We talked about that a little earlier. But most importantly, the biggest thing you need to learn is something you're not going to get in a specific class. To become a good engineer, you need to learn how to solve problems. And the easiest way to do that is just to practice solving problems. And that's part of why I said math a million times and science like twice. Like, it's just practice on how to think. It's practice on how to systematically walk through a problem and come up with a solution. I mean, we call it the scientific method. You ask a question, you think about what you think the answer is, you test it, and then you reassess your guess. That's essentially how you do a math problem. You look at the problem and you think, oh, I have... And I'm not saying like what's 1 + 1. I'm saying more things like we have these two collections. How do we combine them? Well, I look at that. I hypothesize we can add them together. And I do that. And it worked. We're done. But sometimes your math's a little more complex than that. And that's kind of the thing here. It's you need to figure out how to problem solve. You need to learn how to come up with answers and solutions.
What's your favorite fighter jet and why?
My favorite fighter jet is it's an old trainer jet, and I think it's an FT-117. Regardless, it's this one specific jet. It's not even a type of jet. So if you're asking me for my favorite type of jet, it's probably an F-35 because I worked on it a little bit. I did some work on that. So I love that one because of the personal touch. But if you're just talking my favorite jet, there's this one trainer that was flying a training mission, and it got into a really bad spin, and the pilot had to eject. It's an unrecoverable spin.
But the plane landed?
Yes, exactly. The cockpit opening up stabilized the aircraft, and it landed in a cornfield by itself. And the local sheriff calls up the Air Force, and he's like, hey, we got your plane. And like, oh, okay, tell us where the debris is. And he's like, no, it's still running. You guys need to come shut it off. Because it had gotten caught in the cornfield. And yeah, so that's my favorite actual single jet plane. My favorite type of jet, my favorite, like, what type it is the F-35. And again, that's purely out of self-interest. I did some work on that one, and so I like it.
What's your best advice for me?
My best advice for you, stay curious. Curiosity is so important just in everything. Especially when you're trying to look at the world around you, and especially when you're trying to come up with solutions to problems. Curiosity. Just stay curious.
Do you have any questions for me?
I wanted to know what your favorite aircraft was. I saw you asked me. What's yours?
My favorite aircraft might be the YF-23.
I like that one. There's a museum. I live near Dayton, and the Air Force Museum is here. And they have one of those on display. It's pretty cool.
Thank you for joining me today. It was great to meet you.
Yeah, it was great to meet you. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for listening to I Can Become with me, Bohan. Today, I have learned that I need to work on math, science, and art. And don't forget math. And to have a good eye for safety. What do you want to become when you grow up? Why not tell my friends at ICAN? Just visit icanradio.org and let them know. And maybe you could interview someone cool, just like I did. I wanted to thank my guest, Zac Pebley, for coming on to the show. Because of you, I now know I can become an aerospace engineer.